There we go. Let me just make sure this is good. I think I can see everyone the best I can there.
Firstly, David, we'd like to thank you for presenting tonight at very short notice. We appreciate it.
No problem at all, guys. Happy to fill in. I know your other presenter was a bit sick, so happy to put something together. But don't be too hard on me if I'm a little bit rough on it, because I haven't done this one in a little bit. So good to see you, and looking forward to coming up and actually doing an in-person presentation at the end of January that Joe's arranged. So that'll be good, and this one I'll have to do for now. So I guess let's get into it. I'm assuming everyone can see. If anything falls apart, just let me know. Nice to see you. I've met some of you recently. Some of you I've known for a long time, but good to see you guys. This is just a little bit about me. Been in construction waterproofing my whole professional career. Done a lot of different things during that time, from installation to management, to, most recently design, compliance, quality control, all of that sort of thing, to try and make sure we get our clients some good outcomes. So enough about that. This is actually a presentation I've done previously, and it's quite a long one. So tonight we're just going to focus on part number 2 here, which is risk assessment and mitigation. Now, I know a little bit of this might seem very obvious, but I just wanted to share our approach, the way we look at it for construction waterproofing, how we try to do a quantitative analysis on things. As much as sometimes you'll know what's right and wrong with just going with your gut, it's good to always have a bit of a scientific method to actually, fall back into and make sure that you really have got everything covered. So that's what I'm going to sort of show off tonight, is a little bit of that process and how we quantify risk. So to start with, we go right back to basics, is the definition of risk. And there's a few different ways of assessing it, but the one I like the most is the most simple version, which is the possibility of loss or injury occurring. Really simple when you look at it like that. So then how do we assess that? Like, how do we determine what that possibility is of the loss or the injury that could be occurred? Well, quite simply, what we do is risk is a multiplication of probability, and then the impact or consequence occurs when that probability is realized. I know, again, I said I know we're starting at the basics here, but I think it's constructive to go back to basics and build the foundation sometimes. Next question is, why would we assess risk? Well, the answer is pretty simple, obviously, and it's dollars. If you understand your risk, then you can appropriately determine what is and isn't good value, because something that is very low cost but is also certain to fail is actually very poor value, because your money's being completely thrown away. At the same end, over-specifying something used a lot of money, but may not be good value because it was actually a low-risk scenario. So when's this important? Purchasing of any building element is an investment. So whether that's waterproofing or fireproofing or structural considerations, anything like that, you're paying money and you want to get something in return, right? Another couple of points here. Good value equals high waterproofing performance per dollar spent. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, strangely enough, it's using a risk matrix, which you guys probably would have seen this at some point in your career. This is often used for safety, these type of matrices like this, but it can be used in the exact same way for any quantification of risk. And like we touched on before, on our y-axis over here, we have a probability of it occurring. So how, what's the chance from rare to almost certain? And then on the other axis here, we have how severe would the outcome be? And then we've sort of got our heat mapping diagram there of when you multiply those two together, what sort of rating you get for your risk. And just to show that off nicely here, we've got these cool little diagrams, which I thought was a nifty way to demonstrate this. So start with the bottom left, low probability, low impact is jumping across this. There's a low chance that you're not going to make it. And if you didn't, it doesn't matter. Then we've got our opposite corners here, which is a low and a high combined together. So you can see what that means. And then, of course, the extreme on the other side is a high chance of you not making that jump, and then also a high consequence if you fail to make it. So again, probability times impact equals risk. So let's now take those basics and start applying them to waterproofing. So let's have a look first at our y-axis there, which is probability of water ingress occurring, and what are our considerations around probability. And the first one of those is the area open to the sky. If you're having an area which is open to the sky and gets rained on and gets very wet every time it rains, then you have a much higher chance of that location resulting in water ingress as compared to a covered area, such as balcony over balcony, just because the intensity of rain that would have to reach that balcony over balcony is a lot higher. So that's our first consideration. Next one is, will the area retain water? So this is our below ground consideration here. Obviously, if we have a water table here, it's fighting against water constantly. So that's another high level exposure that we're having to fight against, that increases the probability. And the next one is the area structurally stable? So this is particularly important to waterproofing, because if you don't have a stable substrate that the membranes applied to, specifically around liquid membranes and whatnot, sheets are a little bit more fault tolerant. So is it structurally stable? If it's a lightweight frame or something of that effect, you're going to have a lot more movement, a lot more chance of a failure potentially occurring compared to a more stable substrate like reinforced concrete. So that's just 3 examples. There are a lot of other factors to consider. That's just 3 examples that increase the probability of a failure occurring. Now let's have a look at our x-axis, which is water ingress impact. So these are the factors relevant to the impact that will occur if it does, a breach does occur in the waterproofing system. So we've got a nice example on the side here. We've got a green roof, but what's more important around impact is what's below that green roof. And in this instance, not a car park, it's habitable space. Nice architecturally designed space here. It's habitable space. So consequential damage, loss of amenity, difficulty in repairing and whatnot, those are high impact consequences. So habitable space versus non-habitable, like public space or whatnot, is a higher risk. Is the waterproofing accessible for maintenance? So we've identified that, okay, there's water coming in here. Now what do we need to do to repair it? Do we need to rip off all of our finishes? Do we need to rip off a significant amount of area just to rectify a localized issue? And you can see we've got the example here of tiles being pulled off a wall. They're taking the membrane with it. They're probably taking chunks out of the plasterboard, or FC, I think it is in this instance. So if you compare that against, say, a tiles on pedestals situation, you just lift up a tile, you patch the membrane. That's quite a low consequence, right? If you get it early enough, easy patch repair. And then finally, will moisture cause the structure to deteriorate? So we all know a lot of different types of structures. Some are going to be much more susceptible to water and moisture deterioration than others. So if water does bypass the membrane, how badly is it going to damage the structure? In this instance here, pretty badly. Also have a nice another example here. While concrete is more water resistant, it definitely can fail through carbonization and carbonation, of the concrete, oxidization of the reo and whatnot. So just important to point that out while it is lower. Okay, so exact same again with safety. I can't remember the exact words. I think there's a hierarchy of controls that's in place around eliminate, mitigate, and whatnot. We have a similar thing here, right? So, but what we're trying to do is either option 1, we're reducing our y-axis, which is the probability of it occurring, or option 2, we're reducing the impact of it occurring if the primary system was to fail, or best yet, option 3, just do both. So here's some examples of what that might be. You can reduce the probability of a fault occurring by eliminating the water sources, use waterproof systems specialized for the proposed area. So a custom solution rather than a generic solution. I can't tell you how many times we see a liquid membrane proposed for an area just out of habit, and no one actually thinks about what is the right thing for this specific scenario. Next one is use premium quality waterproofing systems with an increased design life and warranty, just so increased confidence in the performance. Next one is use multiple lines of defense. So if your primary system does fail or you think there's a risk of it, have a backup layer. Probably a simple example of this is if you were to do below ground waterproofing and you had habitable space inside, our advice would be to never rely on just one line of defense, especially when it's so hard to rectify and the consequence is so high. You want to apply an external waterproofing, and then you also want to have an internal liner applied to capture that water if in the event there's a failure. Last one for probability is use draining / water shedding to prevent water accumulation. So just don't fight it. Think of what's going to happen and try and get water away from the area as soon as possible. So that's how we'd reduce probability. We can reduce impact by moving habitable space away from the sources of water. So I'll use the basement example again. You can not have your wet area and your plasterboard sitting right up against your structural wall. Create a lined cavity or something there just to separate it. Designed to allow access to the waterproofing systems for inspection and maintenance. So tiles and pedestals is a nice, easy example of that, compared to pulling up screed if there's even a chance of or a suspicion of failure of the waterproofing system. Tiles and pedestals allows very easy inspection and maintenance there. So that's a pro of that system. Next one is use water-resistant structure supporting areas with high exposure. So just again, an easy comparison between reinforced concrete structure and like a lightweight frame timber structure. You wouldn't want to be using that with a weak or a low confidence waterproofing system. You can change your structure or change your waterproofing system, or better yet, do both. And then finally, include redundancy measures for efficient rectification. So the example I've got just there is injection tubes. For those of you who aren't familiar, you can pre-install a resin injection tube in your construction joints. So if water was ever to start coming through that joint, you can easily fill it full of resin rather than drilling a heap of holes, just as one particular example. Okay, so now that we've established all of that, let's just look at a couple of examples and try and quantify the risk on those areas. So this one here, we've got a low chance and low impact outcome. So this is a concrete balcony over balcony, and we've applied a low cost liquid membrane to a stable substrate being reinforced concrete. And it is also over an external area. So it's not over habitable space and not open to the sky. So you would say that while a liquid membrane is a cheaper version, it's appropriate and good value for this instance because it is a low probability and a low impact solution. Compare that to our next example. We've got, again, similar liquid membrane system applied, but it is a full timber substrate here. So because of that, we've got a high chance. It is open to the sky, this area. It also does have habitable space below. So that's high chance being open to the sky and then high impact with habitable space below. We've got a cheap liquid membrane here. Your structure can deteriorate, your internal finishes are going to be damaged, and depending what floor finish is applied here, it can be difficult to actually get to the problem and fix it again. So we'd consider this a poor value solution. It might be cheap, but it is highly prone to failure with a high consequence. And that's why we wouldn't recommend this to any of our clients, because it's poor value. Then finally, we've got a bit of both here, where we've got a medium chance of failure just due to the exposure. We've got open to the sky area and planter boxes. We also have high impact below, so habitable space below, probably got some expensive finishes in there and that sort of thing. And what they've proposed, being a bit more high end, is to use a high cost PVC sheet membrane in this instance, right? We would say, based on the risk being moderate risk, And it is moderate risk partly because of the premium system being applied. PVC membranes often considered to be a premium quality system compared to a liquid membrane. So because of that, we've put good value against this. Yes, you're paying money, but you're also getting a good amount of mitigation in a high exposure, high consequence scenario. So that's effectively the three examples. And it looks like I've rushed through this relatively quickly. So I have prepared a bit of just additional content if you guys are happy to have a look through those. These are just interesting things I've come across on site previously. Do you want me to run through those quickly, or do you want to have a talk about anything we've covered?
Yep. Yes.
That's a yes to the extra content?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, cool. So these are really just some photos on some things of case studies, we'll say, that I've come across previously. Recently actually. So this one was just, you can see this is detailing of a PVC sheet membrane. We looked at this roof recently, and it was interesting because in a lot of the large open areas, they'd actually done quite a good install. So where it was easy to just do a simple overlap on the membrane and weld those, they'd done a decent job. There were a couple of little breaches, but that was not bad. However, where they fell over, and to me, this indicated a relatively inexperienced installer of this particular system, because they were able to do the easy stuff. But when it came to the difficult stuff, the detailing around penetrations, whether it's a drain point or an anchor point, any of the pressure seal terminations or any of the abstract shapes, their quality of welding and consistency was very off. We've seen a lot of areas where they just hadn't sealed it properly, or where they had actually overheated it and burnt it. So this is just one instance there. You can obviously see they've got multiple layers around this drain point, and there's just gaps in the consistency there. So this roof was actually leaking quite badly after they'd just paid for it to be redone. And what it resulted in was a full redo of the detailing. They didn't pull up all of the membrane, but all of the perimeters and all of the details need to effectively be cut out and redone because of the quality of workmanship there. So yeah, that was an interesting one. And then this is actually quite an important one, because we see this overlooked all the time on construction sites. So this is a planter box wall. And in order to have, you probably know, you want to have isolation joints in your block work, because if you have too long of a run, it's going to crack at some point. So these isolation joints were installed, and most waterproofers will prefer to use a sealant or a caulking just because it's easy to do as opposed to bandages. Now, this one in particular, I'll skip to the next one, and you can see the zoom in there, that the sealant they'd applied, it was about 10 mil wide, that joint. This membrane was left exposed, so they had a couple of hot days, cool nights sort of thing, and the sealant actually failed there. So we're lucky that we picked this up. This was the waterproofing before they came and rendered and painted over it. We picked it up, we marked it as a defect to be rectified. We told them, replace it with a bandage. You're not going to get this sort of failure to accommodate movement. The sealant just hadn't stuck to the sides of the block well enough. And while the sealant does have good elongation properties, that doesn't matter if, as soon as it's put under tensile strength, it just falls off. There was actually no tensile force applied to the sealant because it immediately debonded from the block beside it. And then the membrane, being cementitious with not a whole lot of flexibility, just immediately failed. So fast forward to what this would have looked like if we hadn't have picked it up. That joint would continue to move. In this instance, they just rendered straight over the top of it, and you can see the crack showing through the render, and water would just go straight down inside that block wall. Yeah, so that's one there. Slightly different change of pace. This was just something I saw in my local shopping center. Example of a good tile joint. This doesn't really have anything to do with waterproofing, but tiling is somewhat related. So we've got a nice neoprene strip here that's accommodating movement. There was an area where it looks like they forgot to install this, and it just cracked. So what they did was go ahead and put a bit of colored sealant. They routed out the cracks somewhat roughly and put a bit of colored sealant to try and camouflage it in. Lucky this is actually internal space, but I just happened to grab some photos out of interest. So not the best way to be sealing your tile joints. This here was a rooftop membrane. We hear a lot that isn't your liquid membrane supposed to work in water tanks, and what's the problem if there's a bit of ponding, that sort of thing. Every so often we get a nice case study of where they've had ponding on the roof. And in this instance, you can see where it's really not withstood that water over a long period of time. So might be a little bit hard to see there, but it's actually become very wrinkly. And as it's absorbed moisture and allowed it to transfer through into the substrate, and it's just deteriorated. So that's very weak. There are areas where that's been walked on and then it's been easily damaged after probably about 5 years. So this probably held up a bit longer than it might in some instances, but definitely does deteriorate under ponding. So a little bit of evidence there. For all the PCAs and BCA consultants in the room, this is maybe just a bit of food for thought. Is this actually acceptable? We get a lot of comments about Class 7A as per the NCC being excluded from any requirements for waterproofing or whatnot, as stated in volume 1 there. But is it actually acceptable to have this sort of thing going on in your basement? So this, from my understanding, was caused by 2 things. They actually do have water behind this block seeping through here. And then, of course, that moisture is just soaking up into the block wall like a massive sponge. All of the discoloration you can see here is like a efflorescence and salts leaching out of that block based on the moisture. And it's very interesting. I went over to that wall and there was a fur coating on that wall of about 15 millimeters that was just the salts accumulating as that cycle of moisture coming up came out of the wall. Not only that, this crack in the slab here and whatnot and water coming through the slab was located immediately above that. So it was dripping down into these areas and causing this pond here as well. So not really any definitive point to that one, just as a point of discussion for you guys about, whether that's acceptable under the current NCC and whether it should be. Oh, and by the way, when I do get a chance to come up there and see you guys in January, happy to talk about, there's a not for public consumption yet, draft that's coming out of the 2025 version of the NCC via the AIW, where we're currently consulting on that, and there's a lot of changes being made around that space. So yeah, we can talk about that more at that point. I think this is pretty much the last one I've got here. So this is just a lightweight frame structure with FC sheets where they had applied a trafficable waterproofing membrane over the top of it. Material supplier said, yep, put down our membrane, it's fine, just put a bit of joint sealant in between to accommodate the movement. It did not go very well. Between the rigid top coat and the traffic on this area, this walkway that it received, it really only lasted a year or so before the sealant started failing. The waterproofing membrane over the top cracked and failed, and the whole thing really just peeled back away. So this is, you can see fixings there, and this is just exposed FC structure there. So just a bit of a cautionary tale there, especially in trafficable situations, but also in non-trafficable. I just really don't think that liquid membranes, unless you're doing very well detailed bandages over these joints, it struggles to perform, and I've seen a lot of failures around these lightweight frame structures like this. So yeah, effectively, that's it. That's all I've got for you guys tonight. So if you have any questions, happy to answer. Otherwise, I'll leave you to the rest of your night and look forward to seeing you next year.